When you hear words like floods, cyclones, heat waves, wildfires, it's easy to file them under environmental issues. But for a business, these are balance sheet issues, liquidity issues, supply chain issues, and even reputation issues. In the last few years, natural hazards have shifted from being occasional shocks to structural features of the business environment. Hydrological, meteorological, climate extremes now regularly decide which companies deliver and which ones don't. In this lecture, we'll group these hazards into three families: hydrological, meteorological, and climate extremes, and translate each into business language, disruption, cost, opportunity, and risk. First and foremost, hydrological hazards when water becomes a financial variable. Let's start with hydrological hazards, the risks that come from water being in the wrong place at the wrong time and in the wrong amount. Think first about riverine floods. These are the classic floods we see when rivers overtop their banks after prolonged rain or snowmelt. For businesses, riverine floods are not dramatic one day events. They are multi week operational crises. Factories sit idle, warehouses are inaccessible, roads and rail lines are underwater. Even if your facility isn't flooded, your inbound components and outbound products can be stranded for days or weeks. Then there's flash floods, short, intense bursts of water that can turn city streets into rivers in under an hour. These hit dense urban areas, overwhelm drainage, and flood basements, ground floor retail, parking structures, and critical rooms in data centers or hospitals. From a business perspective, flash floods expose weaknesses in site selection, drainage design, and backup power planning. You don't get days of warning, you get minutes. Then there's coastal floods. These are the front line for ports, coastal manufacturing, tourism, and real estate. These events combine high tides, heavy rains, and storm surge, often on top of gradually rising sea levels. Here, the risk is twofold: short term damage when the water comes in, and long term asset devaluation as markets start to reassess what it means to own property, warehouses, or hotels in low lying coastal zones. Next is dam and levee failures. These are low frequency, high impact events. Many dams and levees were built for a climate that no longer exists, based on historical rainfall patterns that are now being exceeded. When they fail, the downstream impact is sudden and also severe. Industrial parks, logistics corridors, and communities can go from safe to catastrophic loss in hours. If your plant, your key supplier, or your main highway sits downstream of aging flood defenses, that's not just an engineering issue. It's a concentration of systemic risk in your business model. Groundwater rise is slower but quieter, just as important. In coastal cities, rising seas push groundwater levels up even before surface flooding becomes frequent. Over time, this can corrode foundations, undermine underground parking, and degrade buried cables and pipelines. On the balance sheet, that looks like higher maintenance costs and accelerated depreciation, not a line item called groundwater. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have water scarcity. When we talk about drought, many people think primarily of agriculture. But water scarcity also threatens cooling systems in data centers and power plants, industrial processors, beverage and food manufacturing, and mining operations. When a region imposes water restrictions, the question for business is brutally simple: whose operations are essential and who gets cut back first? Then let's talk about the meteorological hazards when the atmosphere disrupts operations. Now, shift to meteorological hazards, the storms and winds that can shut down operations in a matter of hours, starting with the big systems, cyclones, hurricanes, and typhoons. These are large scale storms that bring extreme winds, intense rainfall, and storm surge. For business, they can take out ports, airports, refineries, warehouses, and power grids in a single event. If your supply chain depends on one major coastal hub, a single storm can translate into delayed shipments, contract penalties, and lost revenue far inland. Just below that in intensity are tropical storms. They may not get the headlines that a Category 4 hurricane does, but they still bring disruptive winds and heavy rains across wide areas. They close ports, ground flights, flood access roads, and interrupt construction. Then there are thunderstorms, which often arrive with little warning but carry multiple hazards: heavy rain, gusty winds, lightning, and sometimes hail. Lightning is frequently underestimated in corporate risk discussions. Yet, one strike can knock out transformers, disrupt manufacturing lines, damage servers, or start fires in vulnerable structures. If your business runs data centers, complex automation, or high value electronic equipment, lightning protection is not an afterthought, it's a continuity measure. Hailstorms are another operational risk that can cause millions in damages in minutes, destroying vehicle fleets, denting and cracking roofs, damaging solar panels, and ruining outdoor inventory. These events are localized, but when they hit an industrial park or logistics hub, the concentration of loss is very high. Tornadoes are the most intense of the localized wind hazards. An EF4 or EF5 tornado can obliterate a warehouse, a factory, or a distribution center outright. Tornado risk is highly geographic and corridor specific, which means businesses need micro level hazard maps for facility sitting, not just a general sense of this region has storms. Even outside of named storms and tornadoes, extreme winds can cause serious disruption, toppling cranes, damaging facades, halting high rise construction, and closing bridges and ports. For logistics and infrastructure heavy sectors, high wind thresholds often determine when operations must pause, which directly affects throughput and revenue. The pattern across all these meteorological hazards is clear. They are high frequency, moderate to high impact events. They don't just test your insurance policy, they test your operational resilience, redundancy, and flexibility. And finally, let's talk about climate extremes, hazards that emerge from a warming, more volatile climate system and that are increasingly reshaping markets and business models. Heat waves are one of the most underestimated business risks. They reduce labor productivity, especially in outdoor work and non air conditioned facilities. They increase cooling demand, strain power grids, and raise operating costs. In some regions, repeated extreme heat makes certain hours of the day essentially unusable for physical work without risking worker health and legal liability. For companies with large workforces in construction, agriculture, logistics, or manufacturing, heat waves translate directly into lower output, higher health risks, and greater energy spend. On the other end, cold waves and severe winter storms can freeze pipelines, damage crops, interrupt rail and road transport, and spike heating demand. If your operations or supply chains run through regions unaccustomed to extreme cold, a single event can reveal hidden fragilities in infrastructure and planning. Then let's look at droughts. Droughts stretch beyond agriculture. They can cut hydropower generation, forcing a shift to move into more expensive energy sources. They can restrict industrial water use, delay projects, or trigger conflicts between sectors over water allocation. They can also set the stage for another hazard: wildfires. Wildfires and bushfires are where climate extremes, land management, and business risks converge. They can destroy assets directly: buildings, equipment, crops, timber. But even when they don't burn your facility, they can choke regions in smoke, disrupt transport corridors, and cause surges in demand for construction materials, labor, and logistics capacity as rebuilding begins. For insurers and lenders, repeated wildfires in the same regions are already triggering higher premiums, stricter terms, or outright withdrawal of coverage. Then we have sea level rise and storm surge. Sea level rise is slow, but it permanently raises the baseline on which storms operate. Storm surge, when strong winds and low pressure push seawater onto land, rides on top of that higher baseline. For coastal factories, ports, airports, and real estate, this means that what used to be a rare flood is becoming a regular business interruption and eventually a structural risk to the asset itself. Markets will increasingly differentiate between assets that are physically and financially resilient to these changes and those that are not. So, what does all of this means for business decisions? When you put these three hazard families together, hydrological, meteorological, and climate extremes, a picture emerges. First, your exposure is broader than you think. Even if your own facilities are inland and elevated, your suppliers, your logistics nodes, your customers, and your workforce likely are not. Flooded ports, damaged bridges, overheated warehouses, and fire threatened regions all show up eventually in your delivery times, your costs, and your reputation. Second, historical averages are no longer a safe guide. Many of these hazards are becoming more frequent, more intense, or more interconnected than in the past. If a site selection, insurance limits, or continuity plans are built on what was normal 20 or 30 years ago, you're probably underestimating your true risk. Third, insurance is not enough. Protection gaps, where total losses far exceed insured losses, are growing in many regions and hazard types. At the same time, insurers are raising premiums, increasing deductibles, or pulling back from high risk areas. That shifts more risk onto your balance sheet, whether you've explicitly acknowledged it or not. So, what does proactive action look like? It means mapping your exposure to these hazards, not just at a country level, but down to specific sites, suppliers, or corridors. It means designing facilities and networks with redundancy and flexibility, so a single flood, storm, or wildfire doesn't bring everything to a halt. It means integrating weather and climate intelligence into operational decisions, from inventory strategies to shift scheduling. And it means treating resilience not as a compliance cost, but as a source of competitive advantage, being the company that can deliver when others can't. Hydrological, meteorological, and climate extremes are not going away. They're shaping the playing field on which your business competes. The real question is not whether you'll be exposed to these hazards. The real question is, will you be the one of the businesses that gets surprised by them, or one of the businesses that planned for them and used resilience as a strategic edge?